Remembering God's smuggler, Brother Andrew. Yeah. Just last week, Brother Andrew went to be with the Lord. Andrew van der Bijl, known throughout the world as Brother Andrew, the God smuggler, passed into eternity at age 94 on Tuesday the 27th of September. This will certainly be his most important and exciting journey. He went on a lot of great journeys and missions and adventures. Well, this will certainly be the greatest. Brother Andrew was a Dutch Christian missionary who dedicated his life to smuggling Bibles to persecute Christians behind the Iron Curtain in communist Eastern Europe. Initially, he was going by train and vehicles, but then the Westeros donated to him this light blue VW Beetle, which he did over 200,000 miles on. And by the way, when he was given this, he didn't know how to drive. And the only time he'd ever driven in his life before was a Bren carrier in Indonesia in the army. When an officer ordered him to drive it, he was too afraid to tell the man he had no idea how to drive. He'd never driven anything. He managed to drive it straight into a whole series of parked vehicles, caused massive damage. And somehow or another never got into trouble. The officer got out, staggered away, and he didn't ask if he could drive. He just told him to drive, so he obeyed. So he had to learn how to drive this Beetle. And the roads in Eastern Europe were pretty primitive and bad. And at one point, he ended up in a garage in Germany, and this chap was looking at the engine, saying, "I can't believe this vehicle is still going at something like 90-something thousand miles." And he said, "Actually, it's been around the clock. This is 195,000. It's been going on." And the VW mechanic said, "This is a miracle." And he called a whole lot of other people. He said, "I can't believe this vehicle is still running." And anyway, he got a lot more mileage out of it after that too. Later on, he got a Citroen, and he could fit more Bibles in that than he could in his VW. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Brother Andrew refocused his energies on serving persecuted Christians in the Middle East. And that was quite interesting. Andrew declared, if you've heard this term, he's the one who started it, I think, Islam should stand for "I sincerely love all Muslims." And he visited Hamas and PLO leaders, including Yasser Arafat, and gave them Bibles. And Andrew traveled to 125 countries in his extraordinary life. Absolutely remarkable and tremendous. And Bill Bathman, my father-in-law, went to 114 countries. They were pretty close. His wife, Corrie van der Bijl, died in 2018. They had 5 children together. The first time I met Brother Andrew was in June 1979 at the headquarters of Hospital Christian Fellowship in Kempton Park in the Transvaal. Brother Andrew mentioned that while communist governments may close down churches, and they do. In fact, in the Soviet Union, it closed down 49,000 churches between 1917 and 1941. 49,000 churches. It's a lot harder for communists to close down hospitals, he said. And that is why he supported the work of Francis Grimm, evangelizing and training doctors and nurses to be ongoing daily witnesses to patients and other medical personnel. And as Francis Grimm often said, more people pass through the hospitals of the world than through the churches. Well, I was working at Hospital Christian Fellowship because Francis Grimm was the first missionary who came past our church, so I ran forward and joined his mission. Brother Andrew reminded us that God has placed us at the foot of Africa to take the gospel of Christ throughout Africa. The continent of Africa was the special missionary responsibility of the church in South Africa. You have the manpower and the materials to fulfill the Great Commission throughout Africa. And in this, he was actually echoing Francis Grimm's philosophy. Francis Grimm produced a booklet called An Ideology for South Africa. It had a cross in front of the South African flag with Table Mountain behind. It had a brown hand, a black hand, and a white hand holding the cross. And in it, he reiterated the principle that God placed us at the foot of Africa to take the light of the gospel of Christ throughout Africa, and quoted from the phenomenal prayer of Jan van Riebeeck when he landed in April 1652 in Table Bay, and he prayed just this, that this settlement would be for the spreading of the light of the Reformed faith throughout the continent of Africa. But then he made the comment that it seems that we'd gotten stuck in the diamond mines of Kimberley and the gold mines of Joburg and forgot what we were here for and what God had provided. And at that stage, in the 70s, we didn't have 200 missionaries outside of South Africa, from South Africa. And it was a great rebuke from Francis Grimm, and he was challenging us to get serious. And Brother Andrew's message at that devotions I saw led to a whole book later. He published a book later, Battle for Africa, where this was fleshed out much greater. During his message at the HCF devotions, Brother Andrew mentioned the spectacular growth of the unregistered church movement in communist China. This was news to us because, as far as we knew, the church in China was exterminated. There was barely 3 million Christians in 1949 when the communist Chinese took over, and the great cultural revolution launched by Mao Zedong annihilated them. I mean, the people died by the millions, and they, as far as we knew, exterminated the churches. There were no more Christians in China, certainly no organized churches. But Brother Andrew informed us there's a desperate need for Bibles in China, and the communist government in China only allowed a very small number of a very old translation that modernized the language, so that the youngsters didn't understand a whole lot of the concepts or even words of the old language, and it simplified the whole vocabulary dramatically, basically like newspeak, so that you couldn't even think of concepts like resistance. So the old people could read their old Bible, but the young people wouldn't even be able to understand it. And those Bibles could only be sold to members of the registered government-controlled 3 self-churches. Well, those wanting to purchase a Bible in China needed to apply and register very much like you would need to seek a firearm license from the state. It's a registration process. Now, of course, unregistered or illegal underground church members could not meet the requirements of the state and would not go through this process because it would endanger their lives and liberty. This, by the way, was the Open Doors vessel that they particularly conscripted for the very purpose of smuggling 1 million Bibles into China. Bear in mind, 1 Bible is 1 kilogram on average. So 1 million Bibles, I mean, that's 1,000 tons of Bibles. And here they are, waterproofed, packed in such a way also that they can be floated into the beach. This is the Project Pearl operation that took place in 1980. Well, there was no alternative. Brother Andrew said millions of Bibles have to be smuggled to Red China. At that stage, I thought there might be something like 60 to 70 million Christians in China, which seemed impossible to us. How? There were no missionaries there. You know, the missionaries who had been there planted the seed, blood of the martyrs, seed of the church. And Open Doors was preparing for its biggest Bible smuggling operation ever. 1 million Bibles to be smuggled into Red China. So this is Devotions, June 1979. We were hearing about this several months before it became a reality in Red China. After Devotions, Francis Grimm introduced me to God Smuggler, saying, this young man is about to be called up for his national service in South African Army. Well, Brother Andrew fixed his piercing blue eyes right on mine, and he said with great intensity, young man, when God says duck, duck. Don't ask when or why, just duck, or a bullet will go right where your head was. And through the coming months and years, I often had cause to remember this admonition from Brother Andrew. When God gives a command, prompting, don't hesitate for a moment. Now, we met on a number of occasions afterwards, and we exchanged correspondence throughout the years. Brother Andrew served as a soldier in the Netherlands military. He fought in Dutch East Indies in what later became Indonesia. In fact, if you read God Smuggler, you'll discover he was a wild, drunken pagan, very vicious, very harsh. I mean, he writes on atrocities that he committed. He was such a wild soldier. He went into battle wearing a yellow straw hat, daring the enemy, shoot them. He was absolutely reckless, not fearless, reckless and careless. And he says that the only thing he cared about in the world was this monkey he adopted. And all that went through with that. But at the time came, he was horribly wounded. He was told he'd never walk again without a cane. And in hospital, bitter, angry, a Christian nurse witnessed to him and really got through to him. And he started to seek in his backpack to find the Bible his mother had given him. He had never read it until he got wounded and he was in hospital. And now he started to read the Bible. One unfortunate thing that happened to him, he said, was that he had been writing to one Christian girl at home. He had no intention of posting it, but he'd be writing every terrible thing he'd done and all the horrible doubts and fears and angers and things. He was just writing it all down, including atrocities he was committing and all that, drunken revelries. And when he was wounded, one of his helpful friends in the tent found this and saw it hadn't been posted. He put an envelope, put a stamp on, posted home. Incredibly, while he's in hospital recuperating, this Christian girl writes back, and she's not judging him, she's not condemning him, she just leads him to the Lord. So between a nurse in the hospital, his mom's Bible, and this very gracious Christian girl in the Netherlands, he was led to the Lord. Now my wife, Lenora, regularly met Brother Andrew as she was growing up in Austria, because her guest house, her home was like a guest house, was the Rosenhof. And he was a frequent guest in the Bethlehem home, which was something of a missionary guest house for missionaries traveling behind the Iron Curtain or returning from missions to Eastern Europe. Lenora said she'd often be woken up in the middle of the night because a bed was needed by Richard Fulbright, Brother Andrew, George Verver, or whoever, and she'd end up sleeping on the couch and something like that. So she had the privilege of having men like this around the dining room table regularly for meals. I mean, can you imagine the opportunity to learn from them? As Lenora said, she learned to despise weak men. She said she'd met too many good, strong men. She was not interested in these cowards that she meets around today, and these youngsters who are not willing to become men and take responsibility and get a life and all of that. And so Lenora became, I'm sure, very much enriched from these giants of the faith passing through their home. Bill Bathman noted that Brother Andrew was just 6 months younger than him. Bill Bathman was born in December 1927, and Brother Andrew was in, I think, May of 1928. So Bill Bathman and Brother Andrew regularly traveled together. This is one of Bill Bathman's cars. You can see the Austrian A in the back. And they're going into a very obscure Czechoslovak border post. And they took all kinds of missions behind the Iron Curtain together. When I traveled with Bill Bathman, and I've traveled to 27 countries with Bill Bathman, never traveled with anyone to so many places. In fact, Bill Bathman said he never traveled with anyone to so many countries as he did with me either. He would often recount answers to prayer, testimonies which had occurred at the different towns and villages and churches and checkpoints and roadblocks. And there's all kinds of anecdotes, and you can just imagine how inspiring it was to get your missionary apprenticeship traveling with someone like Bill Bathman, who devoted 67 years of his life to serving the persecuted church, mostly in Eastern Europe. Some of the people we would meet, churches we'd be at, sometimes there'd be 2 or 3 translators to get through because of the different languages there. And the people would love to sing, and you could see some of these places looked more like a house than a church, quite right. Many of these were house churches. But all kinds of translators, of course, throughout Eastern Europe. The galleries would be packed. Some of the churches were very strong like this in Romania, very large groups of people, dedicated Christians, and you can see the Dacias. These are the kinds of cars that they would have in Romania, but notice the one Austrian A over there. That's the Bathman's vehicle. And that would be the kind of parking problem you'd have Sunday morning service. There might be 2 cars in the whole church. And to fly to different places, they went on what they call Tarum, Tired Old Russian Machine. That's the acronym for the Romanian Airlines. And Bill Bathman said that they would have the safety briefing consisted of this. They're standing up and saying, these aircraft are equipped with air sickness bags. So that was the entire safety briefing. And he added, and you needed them. Well, traveling around Eastern Europe, we met people who knew Brother Bill and knew Brother Andrew. This is Lenora's baptism day. Lenora's just in the second row, Bill Bathman's here. Here's Nick Gurgitsa and Paul Negruț, 2 giants of the faith in Romania. Phenomenal stories. That's not an unusual amount of people being baptized. It was illegal to be baptized before you were 18 in Romania at that time. And so people, there were often large baptisms once people were allowed to get baptized, and you can imagine all the restrictions. But everyone gave their personal testimony before going in through the waters of baptism. So you can imagine hours long service, but it was really important. And Lenora said there was another lady who gave a testimony that day, that she had 5 family members who were all Communist Party members. Her father, her uncle, 2 uncles, brother, her husband, Communist Party member. And they'd all warned her, don't get baptized, because they understood baptism was that's like the cut-off point. That's you've burned your bridges. And by the way, Baptists were called in Romania, or any genuine Christian was called a repenter, because they recognized there were Christians and then there were repenters. And the repenters were the really serious Christians. And so you want to become a repenter, one of those repenter churches. That was like cut off. You will lose your job, you'll lose your house, you'll lose everything, because the communists controlled it all. Well, this woman who testified before her that her husband had that morning come down and put a knife at her throat and said, you get baptized today, I will kill you. And she testified that, she went ahead and she was baptized. Now this isn't her, this is Lenora, but we don't have a picture of that lady that day. Paul Negrutas there went with her back to speak to her husband after, because she knew that he meant it. And Paul Negruta led her husband to the Lord. He has kicked out of the Communist Party, he's lost his home, lost his job. They ended up having to live in somebody else's home, which was already overcrowded. Here I'm following Bill Bathman. This is actually on occasion when Lenora and I were on a honeymoon following our parents-in-law, Lenora's parents. They were in the front car, I was in the back one, and struggling to keep up. German highways, 320 k's an hour, and I'm struggling to keep up. Never experienced anything like that before. Well, these are some of the people we met in Eastern Europe. Dr. Nick Gorgița, absolute giant of the faith in Romania. The things that he did. At one point, the communists came to him. He was the only endocrinologist in Romania. They said, Dr. Nick, this is enough. It is either your God or your government. You cannot continue to be working for the state as an endocrinologist and be a member of a repentant church. And they said, we give you 30 days. And stood up and started to walk out. And Dr. Nick stood up and said, gentlemen, please stop. I don't need 30 days. And he pulled out his 2 desk drawers. I don't need 30 minutes. I don't need 30 seconds. I choose my Christ. And then they were, now let's not be too hasty, because he was the only endocrinologist in the country. Later he went full-time in the church anyway. But this is normal, the amount of singing. Service there would be 3 hours, 4 hours even. Lots of singing. People might have been gathering for prayer for an hour before the service even began. And this is now in Bulgaria. Can anyone read the words? In front it says, God is love. Behind, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Wow. That's in Bulgarian. Cyrillic script. Yugoslavia, Albania, ministering all throughout Romania. Easter Sunday in Romania, 1989, before the Berlin Wall came down. Bill Bathman's writings and going on and going through take you behind the lines, and it's interwoven because Brother Andrew and Richard Wilbrandt, they were all friends and they were working together in so many different ways. Well, Yugoslavia was a tough mission field at one time. Land of the South Slavs. Doesn't exist anymore, but it was a big entity back then. During a mission to Yugoslavia, Bill Bathman pointed to a bend in the road where he said he had almost crashed his vehicle that he was driving in shock when in 1966, Brother Andrew told him his work in publishing a book, and Bill Bass was, what's the title? Well, he was expecting something like devotional. When he heard God Smuggler, he just about crashed the car in shock. Immediately, Bill Bathman recognized the complications this would cause to the ongoing work of the persecuted church behind the Iron Curtain. On the positive side, Brother Andrew's book, God Smuggler, alerted the world to the plight of persecuted Christians in Eastern Europe and throughout the communist world suffering under communist persecution. That was good. It inspired many initiatives for ministry to the neglected fields in communist countries. That was very good. And translated into many languages. And in 1971, even into a comic format. I remember reading that before I got the book. However, on the negative side, this book could alert the communist officials and border guards and secret police to seriously complicate and endanger those continuing to minister in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Brother Andrew had recognized by 1966 that he couldn't continue doing this for long. He was getting too well known. He'd have to get other people to do it, and he'd be concentrating on raising funds that they could go. And so his book came out in 1967. That did create eruptions and explosions. After the fall of the Soviet Union, it was revealed that God Smuggler was required reading for the KGB. And Brother Andrew put it into his most recent edition of God Smuggler, that it's been revealed. And he's had KGB coming up to him saying, I read your book. The state provided it to me. Yeah. When I asked Bill Bathman how he first met Brother Andrew, Bill Bathman was in his last couple of months of life. And although his body was weak, his mind was sharp as anything. He said, it was 1957. I was conducting service across Europe. That night I was in Bensheim, Germany, when I saw two cars with Netherlands license plates. That's how observant Bill Bathman was. One was a VW Beetle, light blue. The other was a 1957 Chevy. They were en route to Hungary and Poland. I mean, he was a stickler for attention. He could tell you how many steps it was up to different apartments and so on, because he said we wouldn't switch on the lights, we'd count the steps, things like this. And he knew how many paces to this door and that. And he was very much like that. He could tell you almost anywhere you were how many steps it took here and how many steps were up and down and so on. So he always tended to be counting that. Then Bill Bathman remarked that sometime later when they met, Brother Andrew and him, to coordinate trading programs and missions behind the Iron Curtain, Andrew commented on his text and sermon that night in Bowdenside from 2 Peter 2:22. But as happened to them, according to the true proverb, a dog returns to its own vomit, and a sow having washed to a wallowing in the mire. And Brother Andrew just commented and said, I could never forget such an unusual text and evangelistic sermon. But that's also typical Bill Bathman. He'd have these weird titles and shocking kind of scriptures, and I mean, that also was classic Bill Bathman. Well, going behind the Iron Curtain was the mission field. And from Trieste in the south to Stettin in the north, this was one Iron Curtain dividing the continent of Europe between communist and free. And it wasn't just a simple barbed wire fence. It got quite complicated. Of course, barbed wire and sandbags, and this is one of the most famous pictures you must have seen a few times coming up the staircase. It was one of Bill Bathman's favorite pictures just behind his desk in his office of a VOPO, Volkspolizei, escaping across the Iron Curtain at Checkpoint Charlie as they were building the wall. And he's one of 2,600 soldiers and police of East Germany, the DDR, who took the advice to go west. The Berlin Wall was colossal. What a obstacle course. And this is Peter Fetcher, body being taken back the day after his 18th birthday. Shot dead in the suit he had gotten on his birthday. Absolutely shocking. Shot in the back by his own police for attempting to go from East Berlin to West Berlin. Just one of the people commemorated along where the Berlin Wall used to be. And there were many others shot. As Margaret Thatcher said, the Berlin Wall stands as concrete proof that when people have a choice, they choose to be free. Freedom has its problems, but we've never needed to build walls to keep our people in. Well, 1956, there was this massive uprising in Hungary. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Something like 250,000 people were killed by the communists trying to crush this attempt to overthrow communism, the popular revolt from the ground. Russians out of Hungary, burning pictures of Stalin. Stalin had just died, so people thought, this is our chance. But Khrushchev just crushed them. So Khrushchev, they thought, oh, he's a reforming leader, we've got a chance, and not a chance. Burning pictures of Lenin, toppling and smashing the statue of Stalin downtown Budapest, and destruction in Budapest, people seeking to bring freedom to Hungary, and just absolute destruction. This looks like a Second World War picture. It's not. This is 1956 in Budapest. But the communists put a good face on it. They would have their May Day parades, and notice, what do we have here? We've got the hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union, we've got the big yellow star of Red China, but wait a minute, there's going to be this Sino-Soviet split. They were marching together when it came to May Day, and the UN blue flag directly behind. How's this for idolatry? The big red star with Lenin's face in it, but these aren't just communist countries, it's not just North Korea and Vietnam and so on, but there's India. India isn't a communist country. and there's Denmark, and there's Norway, and all sorts of other flags. In fact, if you go here, what do we see? Spain. Spain's not communist. And Chile, and Norway, and Ireland, and Denmark. So what are they doing? They make it so clear with the globe. You have a world to win. Communism's a missionary religion. Communism wants to win the whole world, of course, by force, not persuasion. May Day. Notice here the flags. Hungary, North Korea. Red China. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Now, Yugoslavia pretended to be the non-aligned state. In fact, they were the chairman of the non-aligned states. They hosted. They were very aligned. They were part of the Warsaw Pact. Pretended not to be. China's meant to be the enemy and competitor. Not on May Day. North Korea, they're all in there. It just shows the communists were united all the way along, even though they pretended, so that America could at one time be building up China as a counterbalance to Russia, and building up Russia as a counterweight to China, and building up China as a counterweight to Russia, and building up Russia as a counterweight to China, because they go from Russia's the real enemy to China's the real enemy. Like even now, they are pouring in so much technology and aid and business to Red China. Then they pretend that they think China's the enemy. But they're building them up, and the present government of America, the Biden White House, is in the back pocket of the Chinese Communist Party. They're bought and paid for. That's been very, very well documented. So communism advanced thanks to Western bankers and Western aid. When the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in August 1968, it was when Alexander Dubček, head of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia, actually tried to reform communism within Czechoslovakia, and he called it communism with a human face, tried to democratize. Well, 6 countries in the Warsaw Pact simultaneously invade. 250,000 Soviet troops crossed the border in one day. 500,000 in the first week. And they poured in and they crushed Czechoslovakia. Well, Bill Bathman from Grusgemein, just outside of Salzburg, phoned Brother Andrew in the Netherlands, says, the Russians are coming towards us. We should seize this opportunity and go into the strife-torn country, distribute Russian New Testaments to the Soviet soldiers. So he said, I'll meet you in Wenceslas Square. And so Wenceslas Square in downtown Prague was the target, because that was the capital, and that's mostly in the west. So the Russians had a long way to go before they could get there. And Bill Bathman was convinced he could get to Wenceslas Square before the Russians did. And he did. It took Brother Andrew a little longer because he had further to travel from the Netherlands. But he had to go across the German Autobahn, which is no speed limits. Now, these were just about the only vehicles going into Czechoslovakia. You can imagine, there was refugees pouring out by the hundreds of thousands. And columns of refugees were fleeing in the opposite direction out the country. They get to the border post. They tried several border posts, had to go several hundred kilometers around to get a very Bratislava border post, not possible. All the Russians were blocking off. So they got in some obscure border post from Germany. And the border guard said, don't you know what's going on in our country? And Bill Bathman says, we know that Goliath has come into your country. Well, we are on the side of David. So the man smiled and he says, but aren't you afraid? And they said, we have lots of friends in Czechoslovakia. A friend must be a friend in need. And the man, with tears in his eyes, stamped their papers, let them go in, and said the quickest border crossing they ever had. Bill Bathman and Brother Andrew climbed onto the Soviet tanks to hand out the Russian New Testaments to the invaders in Wenceslas Square. And so amidst this horrific, chaotic shambles of an invasion, when the people are being crushed, and Czechoslovakia in 1968 is a traumatic experience. You'll come across people who immigrated from Czechoslovakia in 1968, for example, who fled at that time. And this is part of Wenceslas Square, some of the scenes, protest. Bill Bathman spoke about coming around the corner and seeing a T-62 tank with its cannon aimed straight at the windshield. And he said, we'd stop. And they check our papers, didn't seem to interest them much, and had waved them on. Brother Andrew always had it easier because Netherlands was never construed as a threat. So a Dutch passport was, that's okay. The American passport, a lot more serious. But the Dutch passport, for example, when Brother Andrew was going into China, they saw that he had visited Israel and he had visited America and said, these are enemies of ours. Brother Andrew said, but I'm Dutch. We're not enemies with anyone. No. Oh, okay. No. they stamped his passport, still let him in. And it helped to be able to come from a sort of neutral kind of country that nobody perceived it as a threat. Bill says he saw the Russian tanks coming into Winslow Square and they just crushed vehicles that were parked. They shaved them down. Some of the tanks literally drove into pillars to bring down parts of the buildings. They're just sheer destruction, malice. But the people in Prague were telling them where to go. They were not impressed. Soviets go home, go back to the Soviet Union, which is CCSR as USSR in their language. And you can imagine these Russians were getting a lot of hostility. But the only smiles they got were from Brother Andrew and Bill Bassman, who were offering them Slavic Gospel Association New Testaments. They were black covers, no names on it. It's easy to conceal. So. And they were offering these to the Russians. The Russians were very happy, popping their heads out the tanks and handing in, greeting them with their few words of Russian that they knew. And these Russians were very glad to find some civilians who were friendly, because most people were extremely hostile, as you could imagine. And so they went from tank to tank doing Bible distribution. So it was one of the most productive Bible distribution times ever. There was a lot of hostility against the Soviets in 1968. But that's a time for evangelism. Well, over the years, it was a joy to work together on a number of joint projects with Brother Andrew, including in Angola and in Sudan. In fact, there were times that we were sent shipments to distribute and deliver. One time we were told, be at airstrip such and such at 9 p.m. So we got there at 9 p.m. and it's already come and gone. Well, because they were using Kenya time, we were using Sudan time, it's 1 hour out. There was this big cube of Bibles that already offloaded very neatly. There was a letter on top. Dear Frontline Fellowship, please distribute these Bibles. Thank you. Open doors. So, how easy is that? The cost of a shipment of 1,000 Bibles is a lot of money. So, we were very glad when we got extra Bibles to distribute like that. In fact, one of our missionaries, George, who I recruited from South African Infantry School, and we were ministering in Angola and Mozambique together. We were in prison in Mozambique together. That's a chapter in the Frontline book. And we put George through theological college and then sent him up to Sudan. After that, Open Doors recruited him to run their work into Sudan and all of East Africa in the end. So we provide one of their key workers right there. Frontline Fellowship helped deliver and distribute thousands of Bibles for Open Doors in war-torn Islamic Sudan. We hosted Open Doors workers and recovered and towed one of their vehicles thousands of kilometers across the continent after it was abandoned in a flash flood. George was camped in a riverbed, dry riverbed. Yeah, it might be dry, but it could be rain way over there on those hills, and it comes without warning. And he got out of he heard some strange sound, got out, and the water swept away his camp and his bakkie, and we found it the next dry season. And of course it couldn't work, but we towed it. Towed all the way back, thousands of kilometers where it could get recovered. So those are some of the fun things. We once ourselves got washed away and lost a vehicle for 3 days because of crossing in the flash flood while transporting the Voice of the Modest team. That actually got filmed because a CBS film crew was in the vehicle town. That's part of the terrorism persecution video. Brother Andrew and I regularly corresponded, and by the way, he was a technophobe. He did not like technology. He did not want an answering machine. He wasn't even very happy to have a telephone in his home. He liked hard copy letters, and they were always handwritten. And to the end of his days, I'd get handwritten letters from him. Of course, we promoted and sold his books. He, by the way, really resisted any technology around him. As far as I know, he steadfastly resisted ever getting a cell phone. And I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. So, although I've got no problem with the very simple ones for an emergency, I won't get a smartphone, but I do have one of these. But at any rate, Brother Andrew was even more of a technophobe than me, like, under no circumstances. I can still remember what I read in God's Smuggler during my training in South African Infantry 43 years ago. Every day on the shooting range, when we took turns in the 4 aflosings, the 4 sections, I used the 75% time that you'd be inactive because you wait and suppose everyone else sitting there watching everyone else shooting. Well, I would pull out a book out of my side pocket and I would redeem time. I got through God Smuggler on the shooting range. That's how many days we spent on the shooting range. And I can still remember it. And what I read amongst the sound of rifle fire during those days on the shooting range is still very clear in my mind. I can remember almost all the details about it. It's a gift God gave me that I could just focus. I could focus and there can be chaos all around me and I can still focus and concentrate and I can still remember what I read, which is a gift in some ways. Although my wife was often very frustrated, I could be oblivious to things as well when I was focused on books. By 2002, God Smuggler had sold 10 million copies in 35 languages. That's pretty impressive. Well, when I came back from my tour in the South African Infantry, Brother Andrew was one of the first guest speakers at HCF. I mean, what a privilege that people like that coming past your mission headquarters for guest speakers. I mean, we've had people here like George Verver and Patrick Johnson, Bill Bath and so on. So it is, but it's a rare privilege to have someone like that. And Brother Andrew not only gave us a report back on Operation Pearl, 1 million Bibles smuggled to China, mostly successfully. Just a few thousand were intercepted, but the rest got to the people. And then he started telling us about the 7-year Jericho prayer march. 7-year Jericho prayer march. Yes, going to launch it in 1982. In fact, we're not launching it. The Eastern European Christians are launching it. It's the Leipzig prayer meeting. And they're praying for the Berlin Wall to come down, the Iron Curtain to collapse, the Soviet Union to collapse, and Eastern Europe to open up the gospel. Oh, is that all? Now, I'd seen the Berlin Wall. I'd been to the Iron Curtain. I could not see how there was any possibility of these communist dictatorships being toppled or the Iron Curtain being opened. Any one of us could be, if you're talking to people from the 70s and 80s, Iron Curtain was going to be up till Jesus came. I mean, there was no way this could be removed in our lifetime. It was just, you'd have to have lived during the time to understand how that was just, that's a bridge too far. There's no way this could happen. And yet here's Brother Andrew, enthusiastically, dynamically speaking about, let's start a 7-year Jericho prayer focus on bringing down the Iron Curtain. And when I bowed my head, I'm afraid there wasn't much faith in my prayer. I was just thinking, Brother Andrew's lost his marbles. And yet, in 1989, one after the other of the communist countries in Eastern Europe toppled. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Berlin. No governments did it. I heard people just recently saying, Gorbachev brought down the Berlin Wall. Oh, rubbish. There was no government did anything. This was done by the people on the ground. And it was the Leipzig prayer meeting at the core of it. It was the people on the ground praying, and they would go there with candles unlit, and one candle would be lit, and they would, from one to the other, showing light is more powerful than darkness. Truth is more powerful than error and lies. Christianity will defeat communism, and love is more powerful than hate. And all of these, so people would come home from these prayer meetings, and they'd have all lights off in their home, and they'd put a candle in the open window. So you see, all down the streets, you just see more and more dark houses with a candle. Not all your darkness can put out the smallest candle. You know, that was the kind of theme of it. And suddenly people started realizing there's more and more Christians than we thought of. And the time came that individuals on the street went out and they hacked down the Berlin Wall physically. And the communists no longer had the strength to resist. They were defeated militarily in Angola and in Afghanistan. They were frustrated. In fact, there's a book out there written by a Russian military expert who fought in Angola, and the title is Angola, the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. And Russians have written in different books, veterans of the war in Angola, that when they knew they couldn't defeat the West in nuclear war at that time, but they thought they could beat them in conventional warfare. When they couldn't even defeat the South African Defense Force in Angola, putting the best of everything, they had all their equipment into Angola, Cubans as a surrogate, when they couldn't even crush South Africa, who had been weakened, they thought, by decades of sanctions, especially economic sanctions and weapons sanctions, said, they lost heart. They realized, we are not going to win. How are we going to win? We can't even beat South Africa. Couldn't even beat Tunisia. Angola. And so the morale was shattered. And the Berlin Wall came down. Here's all these trabbies. So West Germany was producing Porsches, BMWs, Audis, and so on. And East Germany was producing the Trabant. And there's a whole lot of Trabant jokes. How do you increase the speed of a Trabant? Drive over the edge of a cliff. How do you double the value of your Trabant? Fill it with fuel. And of course, these days that might be more true. But petrol was nowhere near as expensive as that back then. And so they said in West Germany, to show that their cars are well sealed, Mercedes puts a cat in a car, winds up the windows, and if after 2 hours the cat has passed out from lack of oxygen, you know that the car's well sealed. It's a disgusting analogy, but still. So in East Germany, they put a cat in a Trabant and locked the windows, and if after 2 hours the cat hadn't escaped, they knew the car was well sealed. I mean, so these are the kind of jokes you'd get in Eastern Europe. So these people from East Germany traveling to the West for the first time is joy like you could not imagine. When the Berlin Wall came down, when the Iron Curtain collapsed, and Germany was reunified, this was the biggest party Europe had seen since 1945. And what an incredible experience. And this is in Wenceslas Square in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. The face of resistance in Bucharest, in Romania. You know, you could just see the determination. Christmas Day, the Christmas Revolution, 1989, the last of the dictatorships of Eastern Europe to fall. Ceausescu's evil regime in Romania was toppled. People on the streets, the army joined them, most of the police, not the secret police, and they cut the hole out of the Romanian flag. We've got that. I should find a place to put it up here. The Hammond sickle, the star, the hated communist symbols were cut out, and they had the now delivered free Romania flag, as you can see, and that's part of the Christmas Revolution 1989. Absolute joy, and what an experience to live through. Soldiers being given flowers in their barrels because they joined the people. Here you can see the white ribbon indicated in Romania, part of free Romania. They're fighting for the people against the communists. And here's Bill Bathman standing under the new Romanian flag. Notice no parking problems at this stage because virtually nobody had a vehicle. And Christmas tree. First time in 44 years they could celebrate Christmas. And people giving strangers Christmas gifts, a new flag. Timișoara, free Romania. I had the chance of going with Bill Bathman, and we conducted the first service in this Calvary Baptist Church in Arad. And this had been seized by the communists in the 1940s, turned into a bottling factory. Well, the Christians re-seized their church, cleansed it. This is the first service taking place in this church. Obviously, today it looks like a beautiful church, but it was just the machinery had been moved out and they'd been reclaiming the church. And of course, there were all these idols that had to go to the dump. 22,000 statues of Lenin and Marx. Off. And sometimes off with a head as well. And this is the Zensky statue moved to, I think they call it Monument Park. They're just there and people can come and wipe their shoes on them and so on. This is the founder of the Cheka, which became the NKVD, which became the KGB. As far as Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, the people in Ethiopia used to say the only good thing about the statue of Lenin is it looks like he's walking to the airport. Although hopefully communism will go, which in the end they overthrew it. So this is 1991, toppled, and the Colonel Mengistu, the author of the Red Terror, who murdered millions in Ethiopia during the Red Terror, he is living in Zimbabwe to this day as protected individual. He's wanted for genocide and all that. But when he comes to South Africa for medical care, even though International Court of Justice and Interpol have issued warrants and Southern courts have said Southern government must serve the warrants, Southern government never arrests him. Mengistu goes back and forth between South Africa and Zimbabwe without being called to justice, despite what he did to the people in Ethiopia. Brother Andrew said, I'm not a smuggler, I'm a missionary. I've chosen to be obedient and not turn away from danger. So when government says no, I said, wait a minute, God says go. So I didn't listen to the no. The Bible is full of ordinary people who went to impossible places and did wondrous things simply because they decided to obey God. When asked if he had any regrets about his life's work and what would he do if he could live his life again, Andrew replied, if I could live my life all over again, I would be more radical for the Lord. Now, I think most of us think of Brother Andrew as very radical for the Lord. But he reckoned he could have been more radical. He felt that sometimes he was a bit afraid of people and he might have compromised at some points. Some of the things Brother Andrew did were just unbelievable. There was a church he's preaching at, I think it was in America. He read a verse and he said, but we don't believe that. I don't see anyone obeying that. And he tore the page out of the Bible, crumpled up and threw it off the pulpit. He read another verse and says, but you don't believe that. I mean, none of you are doing that, are you? He tore the page out and crumpled. And this wasn't a blank one. He's actually doing it with the real Bible. He pulled a hole at me. He preached a whole sermon on verses that we don't do and we don't obey and we don't take seriously. And he tore a page out of the Bible and threw it amongst the congregation. And these people were just shocked. But that's the kind of preacher he was. He was a shocking preacher. He would rile you up. Bill Batten had another way of riling people up, but that's about the most shocking sermon I've ever heard about. I wasn't there that day, but these are the sort of things you'd hear Brother Andrew get up to. An extraordinary person. I think of Daniel 12 verse 3. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Well, to help you understand the context into which Brother Andrew was ministering, you need to read some of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's writings, like One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, the Gulag Archipelago, and what it was like in Rhodesia at the hands of terrorists sent by the Soviet Union, which our board member, Father Arthur Lewis, authored, Christian Terror, which led to the Baptist and the Salvation Army pulling out the World Council churches. Because the World Council Church were using church offering money to fund terrorists to murder Christians. The Black Book of Communism. I mean, these should be required reading in political science classes today. They're not, but we can encourage people to watch films like Agenda, Masters of Deceit, to understand how communism works today. That's why we are firmly anti-communist. We believe in destroying Marxism. Marxism has destroyed so many lives, so many churches. It's so important we don't tolerate Marxism rotting brains and lives in our schools. So we will upload this tribute on our Frontline Mission SA.org website. You can already see an article with some pictures on Brother Andrew on our homepage of Frontline Mission SA.org website. We'll get the audio and video of this up very soon. So, any questions, any comments, complaints, anecdotes, other things people might remember about Brother Andrew and his amazing life?
Do you have any more testimonies of when Brother Andrew was at a border and then he just got through miraculously?
Oh, the border post. There were some very, very amazing ones. We all should know his prayer. Lord, when you were on earth, you made blind eyes see. Please make seeing eyes blind. And he would have Bibles often in full sight. I wouldn't do it like that. I never did it like that. Bill Batten didn't do it like that. But Brother Andrew apparently often he decided he wasn't going to just hide them. He packed them. And he said there were times border guards came and looked around and it's like they didn't see them and passed them through and so on. So there were amazing times when Brother Andrew was, for example, at one point they'd stopped to reorganize all their books and Bibles in different places because, you're going to distribute to this group, so you're getting things grouped out. And along came a patrol boat by this picnic spot that stopped, and they got out there and they were going to come and check what's going on here. And so he had this big Dutch man with him as co-worker. I don't know how he fitted him in the PW, but still. And his job was always to pray at times like this. And they were sure that they were going to get caught. And as they were there, Brother Andrew felt led to initiate a conversation with him about something. It really got through this man. He completely forgot what he was there for. He didn't do any searching and left. And again, they put this down to prayer. And there were some extraordinary interventions. One thing I thought that was funny, when he married Corrie, he was traveling to East Germany and all the way through to Yugoslavia with her. And she would just pour her heart and soul into the refugee camps and cleaning up, and the people who were sick and the children who were malnourished, and all different projects she'd be involved in. And she got weaker and weaker and sicker and sicker, and he was getting so concerned about her. So he calls the doctor when they get back to the Netherlands, and the doctor comes out with a big smile. He says, "Your wife's not sick," but he says, "But you're going to have to get rid of these piles of clothing around here, because your wife's about to be a mother, and she isn't called to be a mountain climber." And it took Brother Andrew a while to realize what he was saying is that his wife was actually pregnant. And what he thought that she is sick, she wasn't sick at all. He said, "No, this is perfectly healthy, perfectly normal. You're going to be a father." And it took Brother Andrew quite a while to actually realize what this was saying. But he didn't travel with his wife behind the curtain after that, and he missed his children. And it's commented by people like Lenora that Brother Andrew would spend time playing with young children because he missed his own children. So, and it's very unusual to get, how many world-renowned speakers and missionaries around there spend time to sit down with little children and play with them. That's something you do. Other anecdotes anyone can think? Comments? Questions? Yes? No? Comments, questions? Brother Andrew came to South Africa on a number of occasions. He loved South Africa very much, and South Africa is one of their strong supporting bases for Open Doors. So it's interesting, there's just a few countries that are missionary sending, missionary visioned, and concerned for the persecuted church. And he saw South Africa as one of the most strategic, important missionary sending countries. That's what he and Francis Grimm were such good friends. He was on the board of Francis Grimm's Hospital Christian Fellowship. I think Francis Grimm was on the board of Open Doors. So the fact that you can see the strategic importance of Bibles and of literature. He was converted to a Bible and to a nurse. Nurses in hospitals have such an opportunity to minister to patients. And that's what brought him to the Lord. And it just shows there's a lot of strategic things we need to think about. We need Christian nurses, Christian teachers. We need literature and Bibles out there. I think at this moment, by the end of his earthly ministry, Brother Andrew's ministry was averaging something like 250,000 Bibles a year worldwide in 60 different countries around the world. And about another 1.5 million Bibles and books, books and booklets of different sorts. So Christian books about 1.5 million, and Bibles about 250,000. That's phenomenal. And it started with a Dutch boy, fourth of 6 children, born in a very little, I think it's St. Pancras, very little village in the Netherlands. And in fact, reading about his experience in Dutch military, it made me think of Anthony Stunder's experience in the military too. Quite a rough, aggressive, vicious soldier actually. And God's picked a lot of his men from military backgrounds, and it's a good place to recruit missionaries from. I'm very sorry we don't have military service at the moment, or anything quality. That's where we used to get all of our workers from. Any other comments or questions? Yes?
It's quite strange how things change. I mean, there was a situation where Bibles had to be smuggled into Russia, yet they seem to be, I don't know, the church seems to be expanding there, the church has been built and everything. And it does seem too that those East European countries now are far more wary of the stripping of human freedoms and all that, whereas the Western European countries are still sort of slumbering, but
yes,
that's how the thing changes.
Completely. So, this is a strange thing. Slovakia has said, we won't take one Muslim migrant. This is a Christian country. That used to be a communist country, atheist. We were a Christian country, we won't take one Muslim migrant. And you've got Hungary, just so resisting the EU New World Order agenda, Extraordinary. Poland surprised one on so many different levels. They also have said to the EU, no, we're a Christian country, not interested in this Islamic agenda. And Russia and Ukraine have the largest numbers of Bible-believing, born-again, evangelical Christians in Europe. Romania's got the third largest. So, evidently, countries that experienced decades of violent communist persecution and vicious atheist indoctrination were better able to survive and thrive than Western countries, which were subjected to heavy doses of freedom, but lots of subversion through fake news and seduction through Hollywood's vile so-called entertainment, and what's been taught in the schools. So the media in the West has done more damage to the church than the Communist Party and the KGB did in Eastern Europe. Isn't that incredible? The churches in Eastern Europe are uniformly stronger than the churches in the West. Man, that's just, who could have imagined? But having said that, there's all these dedicated missions that were focusing on the communist world, that was focusing on Bible smuggling, on ministry there, and on Christian radio programs aimed there, and the church was praying more for them perhaps. But maybe we thought, oh, Western Europe, it's strong, it's free, it's Christian. They don't need revival. Most of them need conversion in Western Europe. I mean, the churches are packed with unsaved people. The pulpits too, in many cases. So, isn't that amazing? And I don't think Brother Andrew could have imagined, even in his most optimistic faith, that the Christians in Eastern Europe would be so strong today. He was hoping, in fact, the verse that guided him was from Revelation 3:8. See, I've set before you an open door, which no one can close. You have strengthened what has remained and is about to die. And it was a pastor in, I think it was Warsaw. The first time he went behind the Iron Curtain, he went behind the Iron Curtain. I should have mentioned this is important. He went behind the Iron Curtain because the communists tried to recruit him to be a communist in the Netherlands. And he got an invitation from all expenses paid, going to Warsaw to the 5th Youth Congress, some major communist youth congress. And so he went there. The communists paid for him to get there. Of course, he took Bibles and Christian books in his suitcase. And so he's in Warsaw, and he found some Christians, and he was able to, and interestingly, he found a Bible Society shop in Warsaw. It's the only Bible Society shop in the whole of Eastern Europe at that time. And the reason why it was allowed is the communists knew the Catholics don't like the Bible. And Poland was a strong, strong, strong Catholic country. And it was just a few hundred Protestants. And they knew that the Catholics didn't like the Bible, so they let the Protestants run a Bible Society shop in Warsaw, because they thought this will undermine the Catholic Church. They wouldn't allow it anywhere else in the Eastern Europe. So that's just a weird thing about Warsaw. And the Bible Society manager shared this verse from Revelation 3:8 with Brother Andrew. God has set before you an open door which no man can shut. Strengthen what remains and is about to die. And the man said, please bring us Bibles in Polish, but also bring us Bibles in Russian. And he said, because the Russian soldiers here come here and they want Russian Bibles, not only for themselves, but because they can sell them on the black market for a fortune back in Russia. It's a black market item. And so he started by smuggling Bibles to Warsaw, to the Bible Society shop, for them to give to Russian soldiers who would either use them for themselves or probably more likely sell them on the black market, but would still get to someone who wanted and needed it in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And that's the verse that got him started. So the communists recruited him to Eastern Europe, hoping they could win him for communism. And everything he saw just convinced him that communism was absolutely disastrous. And then he went to Prague for another event the same year, and this is now 1955, that's when he got started. And at that one, he broke away from his group. And he didn't think he'd be missed. They missed him. They hunted the town down. They found him in a restaurant. They kicked him back to Europe, back to the Netherlands. They were so furious that and they even had tracked down some of the Bibles he distributed. And he realized these people are really serious. And so he had to get more crafty. And so going in by train initially, that was too limited, and that's why the Westerns then came up with, let's give you a VW Beetle. But yes, so it's an interesting thing. All over Eastern Europe, they banned Bibles, except Poland. Because the communists wanted to undermine the Catholic Church. I mean, how crafty is that?
Yeah.